Mm.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming over. Welcome to the Status, Safety, and Solidarity Now for All, and good evening. And thank you very much for taking time to join us tonight for this event. Status Now Network is a network of more than 80 organizations and community action groups that is calling for the UK government to grant status now to all undocumented migrants and people with insecure status who are currently living in the United Kingdom. Our urgent request for regularization of all undocumented migrants and those in a legal process is being carried into the Parliament in an early day motion, EDM 658. We are very grateful to Claudia Webb, Leicester East MP, who tabled the motion with the support of other MPs. Status Now is still campaigning for regularization until now, and waiting for the response from the PM, from the Prime Minister, to an open letter we sent to the Parliament last March. Status, Safety, and Solidarity Now for All is with participation of MPs, trade unions, campaigners, and those who with lived experience. And tonight we will focus on the following. Building solidarity and dismantling the false divide between all workers and documented workers and the trade union movements, and valuing the lives and livelihoods of all undocumented migrants and people with insecure status, as migrant rights are human rights. Our event for tonight, the Status, Safety, and Solidarity Now for All, is also being broadcasted on our Status Now for All Facebook, and will be available there for time, and our YouTube channel. And later, everyone, we're going to have a question and answer, so we invite everyone here to participate. There is also a chat box where you can send your questions and your ideas and perspectives as we go along. And for us, as I've mentioned, we have for tonight, we have speakers, members of the parliament from the labor unions and from other organizations supporting Status Now, and of course, those who are with live experience as an undocumented migrants in the UK. Again, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for coming over. And let me begin. My name is Audrey Rogelio. I'm from Status Now, and I'm also from Kanlungan Filipino Consortium. And there are 800,000 to 1.2 million undocumented migrants in the United Kingdom. Last June, at the height of the pandemic, the BBC broadcast a program where undocumented migrant workers were called an invisible public health risk in the UK, the most vulnerable members of the society in this pandemic, displaced from their sources of income, living in destitution due to the lockdown, and afraid to reach out to NHS for fear of deportation. Undocumented migrant workers work as nannies, cleaners, care workers, doing work in precarious jobs subjected to exploitation and worse, modern slavery. Undocumented migrant workers can never enter into an employer-employer relation without a legal contract. For the knowledge of everyone, in the hostile environment policy of the UK, an undocumented migrants entering in an employee-employer relation is a crime. The hostile environment policy criminalizes migration in this country unless you are willing to pay for the visa or their aim, leave the country. I am working for Status Now Network and for Kanlungan Filipino Consortium, a charity servicing Filipino migrants in the UK. In our work in Kanlungan since the beginning of the lockdown in March, we've observed the struggles of undocumented Filipino migrant workers, from displacement from their sources of income, eviction, destitution, and exposure to the virus. All these while fearing detention and deportation if they reach out to seek help and support. Undocumented migrant workers are workers. They have labor power. With the 800,000 to 1.2 million in population of undocumented migrants in the UK, the undocumented migrant workers, are a powerful force that can bring a big difference. If only they can become organized or become part of the organized labor movement. The hostile environment policy aims to create a semblance of hierarchy lower than the already oppressed and exploited working class in this country, while the rich continuously plunder the resources and exploit our labor. The undocumented migrants are left scraping the bottom of the barrel. But this hierarchy, as we all know, is fleeting. It only serves the interests of the ruling class and not of the workers. What I have observed also in this, what I have observed also in the seemingly implicit exclusion of undocumented migrant workers in the different levels of struggles of organized workers, such as labor unions and workers' organization in this country, I can see emphasis on the refugees who, once they are through the asylum system, can work legally in this country, but little on undocumented migrants, people seeking asylum, and those who are in the legal process. Is there really a dichotomy between workers in this country, between undocumented migrant workers and workers in general? What I have observed, the challenges are the following. How can we organize the undocumented migrant workers for the protection of their rights and to challenge their exploitation under the hostile environment policy of the UK government? How can we address the gap that the labor organizing is being limited by the employee-employer relationship in an employment contract, a gap that excludes undocumented migrants in the struggle for fair labor practice? What is the labor standard for undocumented migrant workers? Or should we have a different labor standard to be applied since their migration status is not regular? The undocumented migrant workers are workers. And even though there is the absence of an employee-employer relations, Status Now wants the trade union and the labor movement in Britain and Ireland to call for status now for all the undocumented migrant workers in this country. So tonight we're going to answer some of these questions, and we are encouraging you to participate in the discussions. And our speakers later will also shed light on these issues that we would like to address on the table. And thank you. And now I call upon Claudia Webb, who put down the early day motion calling for the status now in the House of Parliament. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that excellent introduction and outline for our meeting today. And it's really so good that we are bringing people together in unity as trade unionists, as MPs, as communities, and as engaged individuals working to find a massive, serious solution to this situation. And we know the solution exists. We just need government to act, and all of civil society to get behind our communities and ensure solidarity for all. And I would just like to thank everyone for joining us really here today, and for Status Now Network for launching this hugely important initiative. You see, the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers in the UK highlights the inhumanity that is embedded in our immigration system. As has been said, we see this with over 1 million undocumented workers who lack any entitlement to support from the state and who are therefore entirely without funds to feed, clothe and house themselves and their families during a global pandemic. How cruel is that? In nearly all cases, people who are here are not UK citizens and who do not have leave to remain are not criminals, but simply those who have fallen through the cracks in the government's callous, hostile environment policies. Under this government, citizenship rights have actually been deliberately obscured, and deportation and removal targets have taken precedence. Yet they have made no effort to end the hostile environment policies, which were found to be institutionally racist by the official inquiry into the Windrush scandal. The grim intersection of race and class discrimination has a deadly consequence during this pandemic. Nowhere is this clearer, actually, than in my home city of Leicester, where I am the Member of Parliament for Leicester East, and within the Leicester's garment industry, where a resurgence of media reports has actually highlighted instances of severe exploitation. While most of the workers who have approached me for help are actually British citizens, there are also a significant number of migrant workers who are either undocumented or have no recourse to public funds. These workers, who are predominantly women, are particularly vulnerable in terms of exploitation. And that really demonstrates the modern working class, which is a working class which is diverse, a mix of nationalities, ethnicities, genders and sexualities. We must ensure, therefore, that all workers are protected. We also must do much more to fight back against the toxic discourse surrounding migrants arriving to the UK. Because we've seen the media headlines, the right-wing media headlines, who are willing to portray vulnerable asylum seekers as dangerous and invading. These are the words that are portrayed around our broadcast and media mainstream. The UK government has persistently been warned by charities and parliamentary committees as well, that if they do not open safe and legal routes for people to practice their legal right to seek asylum, to claim asylum, then deaths at sea will occur. But the government hasn't been listening. Yet they have proceeded instead to close the few legal avenues that exist, such as the right to family reunion. This brutal immigration policy, which is echoed to varying degrees across fortress Europe, is the reason why 19,000 migrants were reported dead or missing between 2013 and 2019. You see, while billionaires and big corporations record ever increasing profits, it's shameful that our people are dying of hunger, and it's shameful that the demonization by the right-wing media extends itself even when Sudanese asylum seekers die attempting to cross the channel in an inflatable dinghy with nothing but shovels for oars. This is a callous right-wing media that is fueled by a callous political elite, that is fueled by big corporations, and it's in their interest that migrants are scapegoated and demonized. But we can't let them do this. We should be in no doubt that it is racism, imperialism, and capitalism that has caused the refugee crisis that we see today. Contrary to the mysteries peddled by right-wing commentators, asylum seekers do not arrive in the UK to leech off the state. Asylum support, as we know, is only £37.75 per week. And in the sixth richest country in the world, there is no reason why we cannot provide a humane pathway for everyone in this country, especially at a time when people need the material basis to be able to self-isolate. It is also far from the case that the UK is overwhelmed with asylum seekers, with Germany, Spain, Italy, Greece, and France registering far more asylum applications. We must also remember that 83% of worldwide refugees live in developing regions, not industrialized countries, which further reflects the grim, unbalanced nature of global power dynamics. For those of us on the left, it is crucial that we focus on the reason why we are seeing the dehumanizing discourse surrounding migrants and asylum seekers raising its ugly head once again. Because when we do, we can come together in a sure unity of the left, of unions, of members of parliament, of civil society, with a greater understanding. Because we have a government that has overseen the worst coronavirus death rate of any European country, as well as the worst recession since records began. And sadly, the Tories know that to distract from their litany of failures, they simply have to ratchet up their tough on immigration rhetoric, such as by talking about militarizing the Channel crossing, and the right-wing sections of our media landscape simply will lap it up. This vile demonization is toxic for our political culture and misdirects the justified anger of the working class towards other victims of global extractive capitalism. We have to understand what is happening in terms of the demonization that goes on, the scapegoating, and the continued divide and rule tactics. We need to get beneath that. We must stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity instead with the victims of this brutal discourse. And we must ensure that this floundering government is held responsible for its appalling record. Ultimately, we must repeal the 2014 Immigration Act, end the destructive demonization of migrants, and shut detention centres for good. And we must ensure that everyone in this country, regardless of their immigration status, has the basic needs to survive. As the status now early day motion, EDM, that I tabled in June states, I and other parliamentarians will challenge the government to take immediate action to ensure that leave to remain in the UK is granted to all persons in the UK, but who but who are not citizens, irrespective of their nationality or immigration status, so that they can access the healthcare, the food, the housing to enable them to live, survive, and stay alive, and in so doing, ensure the health of themselves and their families, but also to protect the health of all people in the UK. So status, safety, and solidarity now for all. That couldn't be more fitting. Solidarity, my friends, solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia Webb. As if she have said, we have a current, she tabled actually an EDM 658 of the Parliament. It was a very, very great speech. Now, we're going to move on to Chris Stevens, MP, Glasgow West, and a PAPCS Union Parliamentarian. Sir, thank you. Chris.
Yes, thanks very much. So how do you follow that? Very impressive speech from Claudia, who in a short time in the House has impressed many of us, and I agreed with just about every single word she had said. So I just want to maybe talk about Glasgow Southwest, Glasgow, some of the issues there, but they are familiar to many of you, as Claudia has outlined. And we've seen during COVID-19 the pressures on migrants, on asylum seekers, and many of our fellow citizens in the UK. And firstly, in relation to no recourse to public funds, Claudia is right. We've seen during COVID-19, and as a member of the DWP Select Committee, we've seen the effects of no recourse to public funds, particularly low-paid migrants who may get furlough, but they don't get access to universal credit or any of the other benefits which many people have. And I'm pleased to say that I helped, along with Stephen Timms, a presentation to the Backbench Business Committee to secure a debate on no recourse to public funds in October. It's a very important issue, and we've got to make sure during this period that no one is left behind, and those with no recourse to public funds are very much being left behind during COVID-19. In terms of the migrant workers, again, I associate myself with Claudia's remarks. We see undocumented migrant workers not getting paid the living wage, not getting paid the national minimum wage. They're very much being exploited, and we have a duty as parliamentarians to point that out and to expose those employers who are doing such things. But I do want to spend a bit of time just discussing asylum seekers in the Glasgow situation. Very much concerned. You've probably all read some of the stories in Glasgow. We've had three asylum seeker deaths in the last 3 months. Two of them in hotels, and a young woman in the Glasgow Southwest constituency who was found in her flat. The causes of death are not yet known, but we know that she had a young baby who was starving for a couple of days, who had been there, that a small young boy was just left himself. He was found, we reckon, about 3 or 4 days later after the mother had died. A really sad situation. So what we have is a situation where Glasgow MPs have now written to the Lord Advocate seeking a fatal accident inquiry. And the reason we've done that is that we've been assured by the Home Office that they are carrying out an internal evaluation into the asylum seeker support in the during COVID. And when we asked the question, well, is this internal evaluation going to be published? We're still waiting on an answer. We asked, well, is that report going to be debated on the floor of the House of Commons? we're still waiting on an answer. And so we had to walk out of that meeting and wrote to the Immigration Minister 4 weeks ago, and we've not even had an acknowledgement, never mind a response. An absolutely disgraceful situation. We have had asylum seekers placed into hotels, which for them, it's not the 4-star hotel experience that ordinary individuals or other individuals would be and would expect. They are locked in their rooms, and because of that, they're then denied the state support payments and just left in hotels. It's a form of detention. There's no question about that. And for some of them, because they feel they're detained, brings back memories of situations where they've had and suffered torture and suffered detention in other places and other countries. It really is a scandalous situation as to how asylum seekers have been treated, not just by the Home Office, but a £1 billion company, Mears, who have a £1 billion contract to look after asylum seekers. And I think that one of the other things we need to put pressure on is the payments that are paid to asylum seekers. It's £37 a week that they're being asked to live on. Now, let's just put that into perspective. 30 years ago, when I was a youth trainee for Strathclyde Regional Council, that's what I was earning as a youth trainee 30 years ago. I was expecting asylum seekers 30 years later to live on £37 a week with no increase in benefit. And that is an absolutely outrageous situation in this country, that asylum seekers are on £37 a week. And of course, as we all know, colleagues, they're denied the right to work. And I support very much Carol Monaghan's Private Members Bill, which will give asylum seekers the right to work. They're here looking for safety. They want to make a contribution to our country, to our society. And I believe that asylum seekers should have that right to work. And it would stop some of the nonsense from the far right suggesting that asylum seekers are living on benefit. An absolute outrageous situation. Now, I see in some of the chat that I think Natasha had mentioned one specific case, but it's not that's not a lonely case of people waiting 12 years for a decision and for their status in the United Kingdom. I've had similar experiences. I actually had a constituent who we helped had waited 21 years before they finally got their status and their right to remain in the United Kingdom. So we do need to work together, and I pledge to the great Claudia Webb that certainly you have support from me, Claudia, and everything you're doing. And I know that from your social media, you very much support some of the initiatives that we are doing in Glasgow. We want status for everybody. And I think Claudia is right. It's about class. It's about class division. And we know these guys in the Tory party have never been in a housing estate in their lives. They don't know how ordinary people live. They don't know anything about people's experiences. And so therefore, it's left to people like me and Claudia who have to teach them the basics of what actually happens in life. So thank you all for listening to me, and solidarity to you all. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Chris, for sharing with us the situation, at least, and of undocumented migrants and asylum seekers in Glasgow. Now, let's move on to our third speaker from the Labour Union. May we call on Ms. Sarah Woolley, the General Secretary of the Bakers and Allied Food Workers. Good evening, Sarah.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation to speak tonight, and I hope that you can hear me okay. I seem to be having terrible internet problems. The Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union are proud to support the Status Now network and the great work that they are doing to raise the awareness of the dire situation that migrant workers and undocumented workers are facing, especially now as we continue to live through this pandemic far longer than any of us initially expected to. The right-wing media for years has helped to spread lies and myths that people only come here to claim benefits, they are taking all of our jobs, undocumented workers are just illegal immigrants, etc., etc., etc. And it's shocking to see And to hear people not only repeat those lies, but actually believe the rhetoric, allowing themselves to be drawn into the division designed purposely to deflect from the many failings of the Tory government. And I really can't get my head around the lack of empathy towards people fleeing from war and seeking refuge, looking for asylum as they are being persecuted because of their religion, or travelling here alone after losing all of their immediate family. And people are shocked when I challenge that and ask, well, what would you do if your home was being bombed, if you were being targeted because of your beliefs? Because I know I would travel to the end of the earth with my son to make sure he was safe. And most people would too. Yet many are quick to vilify others for doing just that. It is our job as trade unions and the other organisations that support the network to speak out and to tell the truth, to challenge the lies that are out there and educate people about the realities that this group of human beings face. Because the reality is, for many migrant workers, their wages are the only money they earn, and it's often not more than minimum wage. The changes to things like housing benefit means that they can't claim it even if they need to for support. And if they are unlucky enough to fall ill, which thanks to COVID, they are more at risk of doing than normal, they are likely to have to survive on SSP, statutory sick pay, with no other means of support. Many are classed as undocumented simply because they don't earn enough to pay the bills, feed themselves and their families, and have enough left to cover the cost of the citizenship process, which we know is in excess of £1,500. And what's worse is, throughout this pandemic, migrant workers have kept our nation going. In the NHS, the care sector and the food sector especially, where we have many migrant members who have worked hard, putting themselves and their families at risk to keep the nation fed. They are rightly classed as key workers for the work they have done over the past few months, yet have been treated like anything but. It's disgraceful that in 2020 we have a situation where Mercy Baguma, a 34-year-old woman who worked and contributed to our society, died in such horrific circumstances because we haven't got the correct structures and support in place that's so desperately needed, because it's easier for the Tories to channel hate and division. Mercy deserves better, as do the many human beings in similar situations that don't know where to turn for help. As a trade union, we believe there is no such thing as an illegal human being, and we will play our part in dispelling the myths and calling out the lies that drive the divisions in our society. Solidarity with the network and each and every person out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And yes, we believe and then we agree that there is no person is illegal. And thank you very much for clarifying that as a perspective from the labor union movement. Now, we encourage our viewers and those who are attending the event that you can actually send your questions. There is a tab there for question and answers. Later, we're going to ask you to ask your questions to our panelists. Now, as I've mentioned before earlier, that we have Status Now is actually is composed of several organizations and community organizations about Haiti, and we invited some of these organizations who are currently supporting Status Now in our campaign, and we're going to ask representatives from these organizations to share with us their support, their rationale for supporting Status Now and regularization for all undocumented migrants. And we call on Munia from Regularize to speak to our audience. Hello, Munia. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would just like to thank everyone who's gathered here today for the Status Now for All campaigns, Status, Safety, Solidarity Now for All from the Status Now network. I would just like to read a small passage from a book called Us and Them, The Dangerous Politics of Immigration Control by a fantastic scholar and academic on citizenship and migration by the name of Professor Bridget Anderson. In December 2008, a Chinese woman, Mrs. Wang, was deported. She had been staying in Oxfordshire, having entered on a visitor's visa to spend time with her sister, brother-in-law, and 2.5-year-old niece. She had told officials that she was looking after the toddler, and in the eyes of the immigration officer charged with her case, this meant that she was working as an unpaid nanny and therefore in breach of the conditions of her stay. Her sister saw it differently. When you come to see your family, you're not just sitting there doing nothing. You help out, but she's not an unpaid nanny. She told the border officials that she was looking after her niece, because in my culture, the most important thing is the children, but she was here to see all of us. Whether care in private households is work varies according to who does it. Would a wealthy white American aunt have counted as an unpaid nanny? What of British citizens caring for children who, if they are claiming benefits, can be often hustled out of the home and into the marketplace as soon as possible? Domestic and caring labor revealed the contingent, gendered, and racialized nature of what counts as work and the contradictions that emerge when it intersects with immigration controls. Notably, for Mrs. Wang, the fact that she was working did not give her rights, but the Oxford Times reported only served as grounds for a deportation order that meant that she would not be able to return to the UK to see her family for at least 10 years. So 10 years, that's the ban that someone might get if they are found to be breaking immigration rules in the UK. Yet, as we have heard, there are an estimated 800,000 to 1.2 million undocumented migrants in the UK today. Recently, during this pandemic and crisis, some of you may have heard of the story of Gurmit Kaur, an elderly lady, 75 years old, who came to the UK from India in 2009. Ever since she moved here, she has made her home in Smethwick, in the West Midlands, very close to Birmingham, where she volunteers at a local Sikh temple. She says, "Being here in Smethwick is my true home. It's where I work to help the community. It's where I give back. It's where I know and love the people who have become my family. This is the society I am a part of, and this is the place I've made my home." Gurmit has lived as an undocumented migrant for over a decade since she got refused her right to stay. But this is her home, of course it is. Let us also remember the estimated 215,000 undocumented children, half who are said to have been born in the UK, who know the UK as their only home, who are currently in dire situations due to the current public health and economic crisis we all find ourselves in. At the beginning of this year, the Mayor of London recently commissioned a report looking at the issue of undocumented children in the UK and arguing for regularization of these children. With many undocumented migrants and families and children living in or close to poverty, there is a very high risk of malnutrition, since many can hardly afford even the most basic food items. As MP Chris Stevens from Glasgow and Sarah Woolley from BFAW mentioned, we recently learned of the tragic death of Mercy Baguma, a Ugandan migrant who moved to the UK 15 years ago as a student and had made the UK her home. Recently, she'd been living in extreme poverty after her leave to remain visa had expired, meaning she could no longer get a job or work. Positive Action in Housing reported that she was effectively destitute as a result of this, losing her status. And this is in one of the richest countries on this planet. Having applied for asylum and whilst waiting for this decision, she was found dead, laying next to her distressed one-year-old son in Glasgow. The father of a child who didn't live with her had not heard from her for several days. And it is not clear how she died, but what was clear is the state of poverty she was living in due to not having a status that could have allowed her to work or access the support she required in the middle of a global pandemic. This suffering by a human being could have been prevented by granting her status, along with every other migrant who is undocumented or has insecure status. Last week, it was reported in the media that Prime Minister Boris Johnson reached out to the father of Mercy Baguma's son and offered to look into fast-tracking his asylum application so that he can look after his son properly. And though this gesture may be in kind, it is only after the tragic death of the mother like this. That also happened after a period of extreme hardship for Mercy and her baby. We must remember Mercy Baguma and we must seek justice for all those who are living in a similar situation as she was, due to having an insecure status or being undocumented, as any of them could easily suffer the same fate. Fighting for status now for all is about justice and so much more. It is important to include all humans, not just children, as who looks after the children but their parents? They too need regularization. This is why status now for all migrants and their families is important, and this is why health and safety for all is important. I am from the migrant-founded and migrant-led group and campaign Regularize, and Regularize seeks to improve the quality of life of the estimated 800,000 to 1.2 million undocumented migrants who are currently in the United Kingdom by attaining them basic rights and a safer and more equitable path to settlement and citizenship. Regularize would like the UK government to implement a regularization scheme for all migrants currently in the UK, regardless of status, and for undocumented migrants who have lived in the UK for at least 5 years to be settled permanently. This must include people who have overstayed their visas, people who have never applied for asylum or visas, asylum seekers with active applications, and those who have had their asylum claims and other visas refused or rejected, but have been living in the UK regardless of their status. And you might be wondering how this might be practically viable, but let's not forget that this wouldn't be too much of a deviation from what we've seen with the EU migrant settlement scheme, where more than 1 million migrants have been granted settled or pre-settled status in a relatively short space of time. Regularizing undocumented migrants and migrants with insecure status will save lives and livelihoods. And it is for this reason, it is important for status to be granted to all undocumented migrants and migrants with insecure status who are currently in the UK. Status now for all and health and safety for all will save lives. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Munia, and thank you very much for emphasizing the importance of a humane treatment to migrants, undocumented, or in the illegal process in a country. And again, to all our participants here, you can send your questions, and later we're going to have an ample time for everyone to ask their questions to our panelists. And from Regularize, let's move on to another supporters of Status Now and very active in the campaign. May we call in Ms. Shrinka from Migrants Organize. Thank you very much, Munia. Hello, good evening, Shrinka.
Hello, and thank you for bringing us together tonight. One of the challenges, I think, for us at Migrants Organize has been that number of things, but lately 2 things. One is that we've been in existence for 27 years and have always worked with all migrants. And what we've seen over the 27 years and 20 years I've been with the organization is things getting worse, not equally for everyone, but for everyone in different ways. And that has fragmented us in our struggles. And in the last couple of years, we've all now heard and hear and experience on a daily basis the impact of hostile environment. And we still try to work in our advocacy in obviously legal, but also very hopeful and reasonable ways, excuse me, trying to appeal to morality or values or common sense of our politicians. But I think we've seen with many petitions in the last couple of months in a horrible crisis in which suddenly migrant workers became key workers, that is not working. That our appeals are appealing to their values and civility and common sense is just not getting us anywhere. And the clue is in the name of the system. So we cannot really continue thinking that by tinkering around some aspects of the system, we can make a change. This is the system. It is called a hostile environment. And it has to go. all aspects of it, and all migrants and refugees and people seeking asylum, no one is safe. Even the second generation, the children of migrants, are no longer safe, because even those who were born in this country can have their citizenship taken away from them. So in the same way that Windrush scandal exposed the depth of hostility towards people who lived all their lives here, European citizens who live here now have completely justified fear that this might happen to them, because they can't even produce a paper that says that they have a status. And who is to guarantee to them in 50 years' time that they will have a proof that they are legal residents? So this question of legality is really a question of politics and power. And that's one thing that we all need to work on as a movement, is building and growing our power together. Because they're not good, we will never have a critical mass to pull the levers of power to persuade this government to act, even when it's in their interest, when they can make savings, when they don't, detention costs money, but to them it's worth it. Deportations cost money, but it's the optics of it that's important to this government. So first thing is to build our own movement, where we need to first finish with all the sort of artificial divides across our different movements, and that's where solidarity comes in. And then we need to build alliances with other movements. And I'm really feeling inspired and positive about hearing about trade unions joining, because there is a great history of organizing, and one ways of stopping employers undercutting workers is to regularize all workers. But giving asylum seekers right to work is not going to fix it, because with this government, with hostile environments set up, I wouldn't be surprised if people were then forced to work without choice, especially in this economic environment and whatever it's pending after the doom and gloom of impending second lockdown. So we need to agree to have principled organizing, action, and alliance building amongst ourselves as migrants, working on different strands, but building a movement in which everyone is included and everyone is welcome, and that it's grassroots and led by migrants and refugees together. And we have recently launched Fair Immigration Reform Movement Charter, and we call it a charter because the movement, we can't call ourselves a movement yet, because movement takes time to build. But one of the principles, there are 4 principles on which we're building that movement, and that is dignity, justice, welcome, and principled action. And actually what we are planning to do, and I would like to invite colleagues and friends and comrades to join us on the weekend of 10th and 11th and on Monday, the 12th of October. And we've chosen that date because the 12th of October marks the 10th anniversary of murder of Jimmy Mubenga, who was killed when deported. And we're gonna commemorate many other fallen migrants and refugees at hands of this hostile environment and Fortress Europe. So we need status for all, we need end of hostile environment, we need humane, fair, and just immigration policy. And in addition to all the really powerful comments that were made about class and race inequality that's built into our migration system, we also need to look at the history and the legacy of colonialism and how that brought us where we are, and especially in this country, in many other European countries and in this country. And we don't have a refugee crisis or migrant crisis. We have a crisis of values of our politicians and our society. So we need to work to rebuild our society in the image of positive, progressive values and based on solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shrinka. That's a very powerful message that we don't have a crisis of refugees and migrants. We actually have a crisis of values. Thank you very much, Shrinka. Now, let's move on to Josh from Health Refugees. Good evening, Josh.
Hi, good evening. I mean, some amazing speaking so far. Thank you very much for everyone who spoke so far. Yeah, I hopefully I won't be too long. And yeah, I was asked to explain kind of what drove Choose Love to want to be involved and want to be part of the Status Now network. And I think I was thinking back to that time. It feels like a long time ago. It was at the start of lockdown. But thinking about the effect that COVID had, and thinking about the impossible situation, and reading about the impossible situation that people were put into by work ending and furlough and things that were coming in to support certain people and to externalize and leave certain people outside of those protection networks, and reading about and being informed by the report by Kanlugan Filipino Consortium and the death of Elvis at the start of the pandemic. And again, like as it's already been mentioned, that a large number of the people who were at the very, very sharp end of the hostile environment which affects this were healthcare workers, undocumented healthcare workers, or care workers within that. And just thinking about the impossible situation that posed, and the Status Now network reaching out to us, and that being just so urgent, and that although that has a COVID context, and although that has a COVID and public health perspective, and I think that's what has been written a lot about in the communications that we've done as a network, it's so much wider than that. And I think it has, from the organisation that I work for, Choose Love, we work and see the same criminalisation and externalisation of refugees, displaced people, and migrants, undocumented migrants and otherwise, from the US-Mexico border in terms of the deportation regime, and in terms of the treatment of dreamers, and the treatment of people who have been in the United States for a long time, and who have been externalized and pushed out and illegalized, essentially, to the same things that you see with the crossings of the channel, people not being, not having access to the human right to even claim asylum. And the same thing that you see at the Greek border, even right now, sees with people being pushed back illegally and not having access to any of those mechanisms. So when it came to the conversations around the situation of how people would survive during the situation in the UK, it felt like it all feels very, very linked in terms of people being actively prevented from engagement in social life, essentially. And I just remember listening to when Boris Johnson didn't seem to be aware of what no recourse to public funds were, and thinking about what the uphill battle that means when many of the people who are making the decisions around this access to the social support network that is there in place for a lot of people but isn't for other people. What that means when you're dealing with a government who may not even be fully aware of some of the things there. So yeah, I think it just led us to really think about that. So that's kind of the principle of really, really believing and feeling the principle of the Status Now network, but then also the method of how that's done so far. Like, I think Zrinka touched on it there, but how this organization, how this network is led, just so inspiring and so important that the voices of experts by experience lead this. And it's why I won't hopefully talk for too long. And I just I'm really inspired and find a lot of positivity and inspiration in the way that the network comes together and the linking up of different groups who already, as we spoke in this, we have trade unions, we have MPs, and we have organizations, NGOs, who are from completely different areas. Many organizations, I've been working in this sort of area for a little bit, and many organizations who I wasn't aware of, and we'd never communicated before, and just feeling that come together has been absolutely great. So yeah, I'll leave it there and hopefully not talk too long, but yeah, thank you very much to the network and solidarity to everyone.
Thank you very much, Josh, and especially on the emphasis on the absence of the safe and humane access to asylum outside the border. And now let's move on to Faith. Faith is from Barra. Good evening, Faith.
Good evening, everyone. I've just been given 3 minutes because of the time. And I'll try and just wrap up everything. Thank you so much to all the good speakers that we've had today, the unions, the politicians. We really appreciate to know that we are not in this work alone. I'm just gonna touch quickly about the pains of being undocumented, that your life is in a standstill. You can't do anything, you can't work, you can't drive, you can't even have a relationship because your mind is just so confused. You raise children that can only go up to high school. They can't even access higher education because they cannot access student finance. So what type of do you explain to the children that they cannot even get a higher education because they are not accepted in this country? It's just so painful. It's even worse than apartheid. You know, during apartheid, you can go and work. You could go and you could still own a car and drive. You could still have a relationship and get married. But when you're undocumented, you have such uncertainty that you don't know where your future goes, and you're going through stress all the time. So our hope is on organizations like Status Now for All, and we're also hoping that the union can put a model together where when we start being allowed to work, that we are accepted and that we are protected. Because right now, we are not protected. People take risks and go and work without the work permit because 37 pounds is just not enough. So we are very appreciative of the unions that they are behind us, and Status is also working with all these other organizations. So we say solidarity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Faith. And truly, the impact of absence of access, it reaches down to the most private spaces and lives of migrants, like their children cannot enter the university or walking around looking for work without a paper. And now we're going to enter into another part of our program, and where we are welcoming everyone to ask their questions and to our panelists, and then we will try our best to answer all of the questions raised by our participants. By the way, before while preparing our questions, just want to update everyone that if you have time, you can visit the website of Status Now. That's www.statusnowforall, number 4 all.org for the updates, and of course you can also visit our website. So we have one question here from Trusha P, Health Watch Brent, and can we put on Trusha? Hello. Okay, so okay. So we have a question from Trusha from Health Watch and Brand. Is she or he still around? Okay. And okay, if that, so we have a question on Facebook, and from Apoyo. Can we ask him to ask a question, or actually it's on the Facebook. So there is a question here: a grassroots collective that focuses on frontline supports of migrants on insecure status or precarious conditions accessing services. We are trying to see the best way of collaborating with other migrants group while struggling to assess next steps in the face of immediate level of need. It is challenging to decide what's the best steps forward in terms of actions. Are there many things that we can do, but limited capacity? We would love to know the best way of working with you. And I am inviting the panelists from Status Now to respond to this question posted on the Facebook. By the way, we are being streamed live on Status Now Facebook. Anybody from the group?
Well, I can take it on. I didn't catch where is the group based, but if we have organizers in that region, please reach out to Migrants Organize through our website, and we will come and work with you on whatever you need to work on. That's how we organize. Then that goes for everyone watching.
Yes. Thank you very much for that, Shrinka. So the name of the person is Apoyo Comunitario. So reach out to Migrants Organize, visit the website. These organizations, especially the 80 organizations in Status Now, can be reached, I think, and can be reached to their websites and all social media platforms, including Twitter. And of course, for Status Now, you can always send us an email and visit the website. We're also on Twitter, and you can also send us a message on our Facebook page. We also have a Facebook group, by the way, the Status Now. Okay, so and so we return. So Tricia, yes, anybody from the group, yes.
Oh yes, and I mean, obviously, depending on what, I actually know Apoyo Comunitario through de Londres. I've contacted someone from that group before, and so it would be great if you could. I'm from Regularize, so it'd be great because I was trying to connect with I believe Comunitario works with the Latin American community, Latinx community. It would be good to also organize actions together. This last weekend, we actually organized a demonstration in solidarity with undocumented migrants outside number 10 Downing Street. And, these are the type of things where we can come together and meet. I know like COVID-19 obviously makes things very complicated due to this pandemic, but those are the types of things that we can meet and then discuss what else to do going forward in terms of making the plight of undocumented migrants something more visible. But, I would just like to say, if you speak with other people in Apoyo Comunitario, I'm sure they'll tell you that we've been in touch. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And anybody who would like to answer also from the Status Now. And again, I would like to emphasize that you can reach out Status Now in all our social media platforms, Facebook, we have a Twitter, and we also have a Facebook group that you can join us. You can send us an email, or you can visit our website. Now, we have a question here. What impact has COVID-19 have on the health and welfare of undocumented migrant workers? Can we ask anybody from the panelists could actually answer the question?
I suppose I can
Okay,
take it.
yeah.
So what impact has COVID-19 had on undocumented workers? That was the question, right? Just to clarify. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, because of the difficulties of the invisible nature of how undocumented migrants live in the first instance, it will be difficult to know in big numbers how people have been impacted. So it will be very hard to, for example, conduct a study with a large sample size to really find how people have been impacted. So I can only speak from anecdotal evidence when, you know, for example, just getting text messages from people who are extremely worried, having lost work during this crisis. You know, for undocumented migrants, there would have been some of the first people perhaps to lose work, and depending on what sort of work they're doing, say they may work in the hospitality industry, with restaurants being some of the ones that got closed the earliest, or in the early days rather. If someone in that situation is not able to work, they wouldn't have access to welfare social support. So effectively, they are being put at a very high risk of destitution and homelessness. There have been reports of people being kicked out of their houses and flats because, again, it's more than just about work. It's also, there's a law called right to rent, which effectively makes it a criminal offense for undocumented migrants to rent anywhere. So of the ones who may manage to rent, they may be put at risk of being exploited by unscrupulous landlords. But on the flip side as well, there are also reports of people being forced to go to work, even during the peak of the pandemic, during the so-called lockdown, the restrictions, just because if an employer knows that you are unlikely to run to the police or to report them to anyone else, they are more likely to take advantage of you. And even if you may want to self-isolate or stay at home, be in a safe space, you may not have that option. But there's also the other side where you might feel forced to go to work because if you do not get any income without having the social and welfare protections, you still need to work in order to pay rent. Otherwise, you're going to end up on the street. So it really functions in a sort of like a 3 or 4 tentacled beast, because really the choice of not working or working themselves are, you know, something that you don't really have a say in, depending on your situation. I don't know if that answers the question.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Claudia?
Just come in and say a few words, and I know that my colleague Chris also wants to say a few words. So I think there's a few questions specifically in being directed at Glasgow, and I'm sure Chris will want to come in and speak about those. But I think that the reality is that what we are seeing from this global pandemic is that people have been left absolutely destitute. You know, people who have relied on people haven't just relied on this pittance of £37 a week. They've actually obviously been self-reliant in trying to access jobs which really pay cash in hand. But the problem with a pandemic is the lockdown. And when lockdown happens, of course, you cannot access any form of work. And whilst the government has given a modicum of support to businesses and so on, and it's been paltry nonetheless, but there's been absolutely nothing given to people who are undocumented and people who have got no recourse to public funds. Actually, people who've got no recourse to public funds but can actually work have really prided themselves, even for some people in the last 18 years, 15 years, 16 years, 5 years, 10 years, no recourse to public funds, but they can work. Have actually prided themselves that they've been able to find work all this time and be able to self-sustain themselves and their families. But in the process of a lockdown, of course, when if they're self-employed, their businesses close, or if they're in work and they have to they can't work, they then cannot rely on any funds, and they end up destitute. And we know this from because the Home Office itself has a particular destitution fund, which has more than doubled, trebled, quadrupled and more, and people have applied to this fund in a way that they've never done before. But the Home Office are continuing to be cool, because they're taking up to 30 days to even respond to somebody who is destitute. So it's really quite dire out there in terms of the numbers of people that are left with absolutely nothing, because this inhumane immigration system has created a situation that people can't even access the basics, despite what the government says, and despite what they say about people being able to access support. They simply can't access funds, because that's what no recourse to public funds means. And if you're on no recourse to public funds and you cannot work, then you're in a dire situation. That's why the work of this campaign is so vital. So as I said, I think Chris wants to come in as well, and I think that would be great.
Yes, Chris. Thank you, Claudia. Yes, Chris.
Yes, thanks, Comrade Claudia. We've got a number of issues and questions there in relation to Glasgow, and I think I've converted a Labour supporter to independence in the chat, hopefully. But I think in all seriousness, I think, getting back to Apayel's question, I think that one of the organisations he may want to look to and seek some guidance from in terms of campaigning is the Living Rent campaign in Glasgow. What we saw last year was an attempt, and the year before, was an attempt by Serco, who then had the Home Office contract, who wanted to evict asylum seekers from their homes, and the Living Rent campaign organised a campaign along with MPs to make sure that we mitigated most of that. Now, there was some that we missed, but it was clear from that myself and others were calling for direct action, which is, if we knew an asylum seeker was going to be evicted, there was going to be a team of 30 of us outside the door exercising our human right to peaceful assembly. And I think that that's the sort of direct action, Apayel, that you may want to think about and speak to the Living Rent campaign in Glasgow, because it was a really, really good campaign. And to send off and send home Serco was a real inspiring campaign, I have to say to you. And it was in the great tradition of Glasgow, of Mary Barber and the Glasgow Girls, which goes on to my question that I think Natasha had raised about casework. And yes, a lot of my casework is immigration. Is why I've got a fantastic office manager, Natasha, who you may know, the great Rosa Sally, Glasgow Girl, from the Glasgow Girl campaign. What Rosa doesn't know about immigration is not worth teaching. We sent her to a House of Commons immigration course, and she came back and told me she'd learned one new thing. So we have to just keep at it, and we need that knowledge. We need the knowledge that people that Rosa have got to help constituents navigate their way through this inhumane immigration system. The fact that people are waiting years, the fact that people can, if they've been here longer than 10 years, can put in a long-term claim. All of that is really, really important and really, really vital that we do that. So direct action works. That's what Glasgow showed 2 years ago and last year in relation to what we were going to do. And we called for that. And Serco were nervous about that, of knowing that if they tried to evict somebody, there would be a team of people exercising their right to freedom of peaceful assembly. It's a human right. I mean, people like Serco and others deny our fellow Glaswegians their human rights, then fellow Glaswegians will stand up and rise. And just to make it clear to everybody, if you want to be a Glaswegian, the rules are very simple. all you need to do is, having lived in Glasgow for one day, and you're a Glaswegian for the rest of your life.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. We have a question here from Kanlugan Filipino Consortium, Ms. Susan Cueva. Can we put her on the screen, please? And then after her, we have Rahat also will ask a question. So, yeah. Yes.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to ask our MPs if there's a possibility at all, if you could arrange a meeting with Boris Johnson for representatives from Status Now campaign, because we've written him a letter and he hasn't responded to our letter, and we really just want to have a discussion with him so we can explain to him, the whole kind of reason for our campaign. Is that something that the MPs can facilitate? Thank you.
Well, I mean, he much less responds to us, let alone the public. We've seen, as you've seen, his disastrous performance of and handling of this coronavirus and this economy. Really, Boris isn't somebody to be trusted. The Tories in government aren't delivering and will never be able to deliver what we need. The only way we're going to be able to get the change that we need is to really enable this Tory government to leave office because they cannot cope. So we obviously need to keep up the pressure, and we will continue to keep up the pressure. And as opposition MPs, which is what we are, and at the end of the day, we would challenge and keep up the pressure to enable this government to see sense. But you're already seeing how and what they think of migrants by their treatment over the summer, prepared to sacrifice migrants for the sake of their disastrous policies, and not even have the common decency and understanding that during this pandemic, the least you can do is enable everyone who's in the UK today during this crisis to have the ability to access the basics, and they haven't even understood that point. And so we will continue to push home this agenda. And the biggest and best way you can raise your voice and representation to the to Parliament and the Prime Minister. I mean, we've all been inspired by what the Black Lives Matter movement has done in terms of taking direct action. But it will be the grassroots energies of people to be able to take direction. And I appreciate this is difficult during this pandemic, but as well as using the voice of MPs like me and Chris and others, I think there's also opportunities in Parliament to present things like petitions, to call on MPs to orchestrate a debate on the issue, to ask questions at Prime Minister's questions, if you can get people, MPs, to push questions forward when they've got an opportunity at Prime Minister's questions to do just that. But nothing is going to be greater than direct action and the work that you're doing here now, building unity and solidarity across the left, because that's what's important. The greater steam that we build on this, the more that get energized and involved and back this campaign, the more and more that the Tory government will have to wake up and hopefully listen. But in this current position and state, I certainly don't hold much hope that they can manage this coronavirus, let alone the economy. And certainly they're not seeking to support and understand the argument that if you help the most vulnerable in our society and community, you will help us all to stay safe. That basic understanding they've not yet grasped to be able to solve the very problem of this crisis.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Yes, Chris?
Yeah, well, we can always ask, but you know, you probably got a better chance of meeting Boris Johnson's housekeeper than you have meeting Boris Johnson. I mean, you've got a guy who, and let's just remember this, because it was only a few months ago, it emphasises Claudia's point about them not understanding life. When Boris Johnson met the chairs of the select committees, and Stephen Timms had to explain to Boris Johnson what no recourse to public funds actually was. And he had to explain it to the Prime Minister in a way that nursery teacher would have to explain to a child, because it was the only way he was getting the message. So, you know, if he doesn't understand that, he probably won't understand status now. But I do agree with Claudia. I think it's a good idea, actually, is to set up a parliamentary petition and let's see if we can get that debated in the House of Commons. It requires 100,000 signatures. I'm sure there's a lot of you here. There's a lot watching. You know, I'm sure you all know 10 friends. You know, get them to, you know, get that across in social media so we can get that debate. 10,000, the government has to respond. 100,000 gets us a debate. So let's think about that. I think that's a really good idea.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. We have a question here. Will the recording be available to us to share with our groups? Yes, this will be available on our website and FB, and also on our YouTube channel. And how do we join the campaign for Status Now for All? I do suggest everyone to visit our website, statusnowforall.org, and then send us an email. And then we can include you to the signatories. Now, we have a question from Rahat. Can we put Rahat on the screen, please?
Hello, good evening. Hello.
Yes, good evening. Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Hello, we can
Good
hear
evening.
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Actually, I would like to talk to you today about the solidarity and the problem of the immigrants. The thing is that I am really very old guy who is living in this country more than 16 years. And I have already seen a lot of many spring season and the autumn seasons. And I have very well know about this guy, Mr. Boris Johnson, who is Prime Minister at the moment of the United Kingdom. First, he announced the call amnesty or give the documents to the people in 2008 when he was the mayor of the London, and the David Cameron was the PM, Prime Minister. The thing is that he talked about the amnesty and giving the status to the undocumented people many times, but unluckily, unfortunately, there is a lot of many loopholes which are not allowing to the government to give the amnesty or give them the status. The reason, there are a lot of many number reasons behind that let's suppose it's first of all, it's a very huge number of the undocumented people. Suppose if they will give the documents to the everyone, 8 million people next day, tomorrow or day after tomorrow, on the next day we must have to realize that everybody will go to the social care and like universal credit or something like that. I mean that they're gonna definitely claim the benefits. The all pressure will go to the government, which they don't want to take the pressure, and they don't have much funds available to accommodate 8 million people in one's time. So my idea, I just want to give you the solution that what is in my mind at the moment. I was thinking that at least that they just allow the people, undocumented people, in a route of a 5-year visa route, something like that, without claiming any kind of benefit, right? So that they can start to work. I mean that they are already working, they are in the system. You cannot say they are not working, they are not surviving. They are surviving in somehow. My problem is that there is a mental stress for them. There is a lot of many anxiety.
Okay.
Many people have been died because of the stress and this anxiety. I understand about the pressure of the government. I know that Boris Johnson is a prime minister. Let's suppose that if I am a prime minister and I must have to, and somebody or some organization is gonna be come to me and claim that we are 8 million people and we want to like claim our like nationality or like any kind of benefits or something. It will be a really very big pressure on. So,
Okay, Rahat, hello. Okay, I think we lost him. Well, maybe we can just send him an email or ask him to send her his thoughts on the chat group. Now we have a very limited time, so we have two questions before we end. One is for the for Sarah. Sarah, we would like to see, there's a question for Sarah. We would like to see that all trade unions in the UK to sign up to our call for status now and regularization. Can the Bakers Union facilitate to ask the TUC and other unions to make a clear position to support regularization of all undocumented?
We sit on the General Federation of Trade Unions Executive Committee, and we sit on the TUC's General Council as an observer, so I can certainly put them to the trade unions through those two channels.
Okay. Yes, Munia, sorry.
I just wanted to answer Rahab's question because there was a question there. There were plenty of questions, but maybe we can do that after.
Okay, and okay, thank you very much. And then we have we're actually receiving a lot of questions here, but we're going to close this. We're going to have one last question from Francesca. Can we have her on the screen, please?
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. So I have a question, I guess, about how we can build coalitions with broader movements that are taking a lot of space in the mainstream, and quite rightly so, mostly anti-racism and the fight against climate change. I think especially for, there can be a reluctance to talk about migrants' rights because it's messy, because it's a threat to nationalism, it's a threat to national cohesion. And so how can we make that case, especially I find with climate change activists, that actually they do need to care about the most vulnerable, and that these systems of exploitation are totally connected, and that all, you know, that there is a way of solving these things together. Thanks.
Okay, so like how can we connect the broader fight against systemic racism and climate crisis with the plight of migrant rights? Anybody from the group can answer? Yes, Munia, and then Josh.
Okay. Yeah, so someone else in the chat is, so I'm going to answer Sarah's question first and then Rahat, if that's okay, quickly.
Okay.
Okay, so in terms of like, I mean, addressing the climate crisis and connecting with the migrant rights movement, actually 2 weeks ago, we actually participated in Status Now Network and Regularize. We participated in a demonstration called Climate Justice is Migrant Justice, organized by Global Justice Rebellion over here in London outside the Home Office. And it was a very successful action and demonstration. That was, to me, felt like the beginnings of this conversation within the broader climate change activism movement. It's something that's needed to happen for a long time, but I do believe the conversation is happening. As Sarah mentioned, it's a very difficult conversation to have. I've had my frustrations as I'm involved in, you know, sort of climate stuff as well. I've had my frustrations trying to have the conversations of migration in those circles, in those groups. But I do think if you look at organizations like Global Justice Rebellion, there are people who are doing this. And perhaps you can also form some sort of anti-oppression groups in your nearby vicinity to have these conversations. But perhaps, yeah, Josh can add a lot more to that. However, I just wanted to address Rahat's questions because I think this is really important to talk about because I think there were a lot of misconceptions in what he said, and it's important. This thing is going to be online. It's going to be recorded. Rahat, firstly, there are not 8 million undocumented migrants in the UK. Yes, the numbers are difficult to know exactly, but the estimates range anywhere from 600,000 to 1.2 million. It's not 8 million. Secondly, the misconception was that Rahat made was that everyone is going to run and claim benefits, or what we call, sort of universal credit, etc. I think, firstly, this is something that might not be the case because a lot of people would have been working already before this crisis. This is a group of people who don't have access to these things in the first instance. And there's not a group of people that are just sitting there waiting to claim benefits. However, there is a crisis and there's absolutely nothing wrong in people claiming welfare. We do believe we live in one of the richest countries in the world, the sixth apparently, and an additional 400,000, 600,000 people to 1.2 million over the course of however long, if another lockdown comes, I don't think would bankrupt the government, personally speaking. And these are people who already work, they have been working. If they're regularized, they're going to work and they'll be able to pay into the tax pot. Actually, there are estimates that suggest that if every single undocumented migrant was regularized in the UK, amongst the ones who work, within the first year of paying tax into the public pot, between 1 and 3 billion pounds would be raised in the first year alone. In the first year alone. Now imagine that people are regularized, they're able to live here all their lives or for 10 years. That's already 10 billion to 30 billion pounds that can be raised from the tax pot. So we really need to get rid of this whole idea that people are either scroungers. Let's not call people scroungers in the first instance because there's nothing wrong with claiming benefits or seeking help from the government. We need to get rid of the idea that people are coming here because they want to access welfare and benefits. Most people I've spoken with and I know want to work and they want to pay taxes and be able to live and contribute and participate fully in the economy.
Okay, thank you. And Josh?
Just to go back to the climate point, I think I'll make a couple of recommendations just because of the time, but I would recommend checking out an organisation called Louder Than the Storm, who are doing work on bringing together the two very, very, very interlinked things, including migration, displacement, and the climate crisis. And also an amazing book by Sonia Shah called The Great Migration. I'll write it down in the chat box, but heavily recommend that. And I think regularize is a really interesting term when we're talking about this, because I also think as people who communicate about migration and as people who communicate about displacement and refugee and asylum seeking issues, there's a difficulty in us going, this is an emergency, people are going to have to move because there's an emergency. And also sometimes people are moving and there are therefore social and economic benefits to the host society. But also both of those things have the movement of people as exceptional. And I think that from my personal perspective and from my thinking around this, I think there's a real uphill battle to try and argue for the normalization of the fact that humans move, it happens. And I think the regularization is really within that concept. And I think rather than us, as people who communicate about it, always focusing on the emergency, and I think that particularly with the climate crisis, there's going to be some people whose homes are underwater, but many people are going to just make the decision to move. Like they're going to make the decision to move before their homes are literally underwater, or the storms are so bad that nothing will grow. Like people just move around the world. That's just what happens, and people weigh up their individual choices as human beings as well, rather than as victims of this situation. So I think there's something in that little rant there. Maybe it's an answer, maybe it's not.
Okay. And thank you very much for that, Josh. So we're running out of time, and we are about to close the event for tonight. And before we will return for another activity. Probably will inform everyone. And just an important things that, I mean, pointers that we tonight, words such as solidarity, access, and movement, and remove all the artificial divide between us. These are the important words and concepts that we discussed or open today in our conversation. Again, before we end our program for tonight, we would like to thank all the participants, our speakers for tonight, and we would like to thank also to all those who attended this webinar. And again, I am encouraging everyone, together with the people from Status Now, to visit our website, Status Now for All, and our FB page and our Twitter. And of course, send us an email for if you have questions or concerns or suggestions regarding Status Now. And of course, we are encouraging everyone, EDM 658 is still active. If you have questions on how to participate and how to help, it has been tabled by Claudia Webb. You can visit the website of Status Now for All. Again, everyone, with the greetings of solidarity, thank you very much for attending this webinar. And if we build solidarity together, we can win. Again, thank you and have a great night to everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.